The sky that day was gray and heavy, weighed down by the lingering clouds of Hurricane Milton. Matthew Prebish, a captain for Southwest Airlines, sat in the cockpit, his hand resting lightly on the controls. He had flown thousands of flights in his career, short hops across states and long hauls across the country. But today's flight was different. This wasn't a trip carrying passengers with suitcases full of clothes or mundane life stories. This was a rescue mission, transporting over 150 animals, dogs, cats, rabbits, even a small bird, innocent creatures left behind in the wake of two devastating storms, Milton and Helene. Matthew wasn't a sentimental man. As a pilot, he kept his mind sharp, focused on numbers, weather charts, and schedules. But when he agreed to take on this flight, something inside him stirred. He'd heard stories of pets lost to their families in natural disasters, their wide, bewildered eyes peering through the bars of crates. He told himself that if he had the chance, he wanted to do something more meaningful than just sit behind the controls. The flight departed from a small airport in Florida, where rescue workers had tirelessly gathered animals from the ravaged areas. Matthew glanced out the cockpit window as the plane taxied down the runway. Below, crates were stacked high, and the sounds of barking and meowing echoed through the air. He gave a faint smile, thinking this might be the noisiest flight he'd ever commanded. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Matthew handed the controls to his co-pilot, a quiet man named Jake. "I'm going to check on things back there," Matthew said, rising from his seat. Jake nodded, his eyes still fixed on the instrument panel. Matthew stepped out of the cockpit and walked along the passenger cabin, now stripped of seats and filled with rows of secured crates. The air in the cabin buzzed with noise, dogs barking for food, cats meowing to be let out, rabbits scratching softly at their enclosures. A few volunteers who had joined the flight to care for the animals were busy distributing water and kibble. Matthew paused, taking it all in. He wasn't used to this scene. A pilot like him typically saw tired passengers dozing off or children crying for their mothers. But today, he felt something different, a vibrant yet fragile energy. Then he heard it, a small, faint cry, distinct from the cacophony around him. Matthew turned his head, trying to locate the source. It came from a corner near the back of the cabin, where a tiny crate sat apart from the rest. He walked over and crouched down to look inside. There, nestled within, was a kitten, its white fur flecked with patches of gray, its large blue eyes gazing at him with curiosity. The kitten was so small it could fit in the palm of his hand, its little legs trembling as it tried to stand and let out another weak meow. "Hey, little one," Matthew whispered, settling down beside the crate. He reached through the bars and the kitten immediately tilted its head, brushing its tiny pink nose against his finger. A volunteer, a young woman named Sarah with her hair tied up high, approached. "That's Avery," Sarah said, her voice warm. "We found her in a flooded house. Her owner probably didn't make it. Avery was the only survivor of her litter." Matthew nodded, his eyes still locked on the kitten. "How old is she?" "About 4 weeks. Still tiny but tough. She made it through the worst days." Sarah smiled, though a hint of sadness flickered in her eyes. "We're not sure if anyone will adopt her. People usually go for the bigger, stronger ones." Matthew didn't say anything more. He just sat there watching Avery. The kitten meowed again, as if trying to talk to him. Something in those blue eyes made his heart skip a beat. He stood up, clapping Sarah lightly on the shoulder. "Thanks for taking care of her. I'll head back to the cockpit now." But as he walked away, Avery's faint cries lingered behind him, like an invisible thread tugging at his soul. The flight lasted 3 hours, delivering the animals to a rescue center in Texas. When the plane touched down, Matthew felt a mix of relief and reluctance. He had completed the mission, but a part of him didn't want to leave that cargo hold, or rather didn't want to leave the tiny kitten he'd met. After finishing the post-flight checks, Matthew decided to return to the cabin to see how Avery was doing. He found Sarah cradling the kitten in her arms, stroking its soft fur. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She's fine, just a little hungry," Sarah said with a laugh. "I gave her some milk. She loves being held." Matthew reached out, hesitating. "Can I hold her for a bit?" Sarah nodded and placed Avery in his hands. The kitten nestled perfectly in his palm, warm and light as a cloud. He could feel her tiny heartbeat pulsing through her delicate frame. Avery looked up at him with those clear blue eyes and let out a soft meow, as if saying hello. In that moment, Matthew knew he couldn't walk away without her. He'd never considered adopting a pet. His life was a whirlwind of flights, unfamiliar hotels, and days away from home. But something about Avery, her resilience, her fragility, or maybe just the way she looked at him, made him want to change. "Can I adopt her?" he asked Sarah, his voice steadier than he expected. Sarah blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide grin. "Really? Are you serious?" "Never been more serious," Matthew replied, his gaze still fixed on Avery. The adoption process wasn't too complicated. The rescue center was thrilled that one of their little charges had found a home, especially with someone like Matthew, who had just helped save them all. They checked Avery's health, gave her vaccinations, and handed him a long list of supplies to buy: kitten formula, a warm blanket, feeding bowls, and a small carrier to take her home. As Matthew drove back to his apartment in Dallas, Avery sat in her carrier on the passenger seat, meowing softly. He glanced over, smiling. "You're gonna like it here, kid. No storms, no floods, just you and me." That first night wasn't easy. Avery was so young she needed feeding every few hours. Matthew woke up in the middle of the night, mixed formula, and held her patiently as she drank tiny sips. He didn't complain. Maybe it was because he was used to sleepless nights in the cockpit, or maybe because he felt Avery deserved that care. Day by day, Avery grew in Matthew's apartment. She began exploring every corner, from the sofa to the bookshelf, even climbing onto the desk where he reviewed flight schedules. He bought her a little blue collar with Avery engraved on a small metal tag. Watching her play, Matthew often thought back to that fateful flight, and he told himself adopting her was the best decision he'd ever made. A month later, Matthew was invited to an event hosted by Southwest Airlines to share the story of the rescue flight. He brought Avery along, holding her in his arms as he stood before the crowd. The audience clapped enthusiastically as he recounted how he met her, how those blue eyes had changed him. "My life has always been about the sky," he said, his voice steady and warm. "But Avery brought me back to the ground, gave me a reason to come home." From then on, Avery became the pilot cat, famous among Matthew's flight crew. Whenever he packed for a trip, she'd curl up on his suitcase, as if wanting to tag along. Matthew would just laugh and scratch her head. "You stay here and wait for me, kid. I'll be back soon." And he always kept his word. No matter how vast the sky or how far his flights took him, Matthew knew that at home, a little kitten was waiting. A small but vital piece of the loving journey he'd never expected. Subscribe for more incredible stories and leave a comment below.